So last time we were talking about Gaza, and this week a couple of things have come up. You know, a couple of things that I really think. The first thing was, I think that there's a sea change in opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think relating to Gaza? Is that
Yeah,
not-
yeah. There's been more pro-Palestinian coverage and sentiment, especially in the U.S., which is something new.
Yeah, but that's against the grain of what you said. You said that those views are so deeply entrenched.
Well, I've been out of the U.S. now for 17 years, so I don't really have my finger on the pulse of the young people. Yeah. And it's the young people who are coming out, just coming off of Black Lives Matter, and they're just more activated.
But that's radical, though. That's a radical shift. I mean, look at that. The New York Times. Now, let's put that a little context on it. The New York Times. Now, what kind of paper is the New York Times?
It's the mainstream. It's considered liberal, but not,
Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never really given a good version of the story of Palestine, really.
Never.
And a couple of days ago, they did a front page, piece. And, I mean, it was astounding. I mean, it was like all 62 of the children that are being killed in Gaza, every photo plus a little kind of backstory of who they were, what they liked, what their dreams were, what their aspirations. And that's a monumental change.
Yeah. Well, and in government, too, you had Congress people petitioning for the cessation of the war and the funding of the Israelis. You had Joe Biden, although he did ship weapons to Israel during the bombing, he had to call it off. He was forced politically. There was too much pressure.
But I think, there's a number of things there. One is that that's one sense I get. In the States, things have kind of changed. There's been a shift. And I think that shift has arisen because of the focus on the humanity of the situation. I mean, it's almost impossible, given kind of the social media coverage this has been getting. Oh. And also, it's also very much driven by the public, which is a really good thing. Yeah. This is sentiment that's forcing politicians to act. And I think that's such an important thing. I mean, because I think overall people in general feel very disempowered at this moment in history. They feel that, they don't have that, capacity to resist. Changes just seem to happen. Decisions seem to just be made. Events just seem to unfold, and people don't feel that they really have power. But recently, with Black Lives Matter, with the Me Too movement, and now with Gaza, the strength of public opinion and just the weight of it, just the immense numbers of...
And while the U.S. just not overlooked, but just ignored the pressure against, say, the Iraq War in 2003, I don't think they just have the motivation to do that now. They don't want that kind of pressure now.
Yeah, and I think also they don't want the pressure, but I'm not sure it was the same type of pressure back in 2000.
That's a good point.
It wasn't. I mean, there was people on the streets, there were people protesting, there were voices. Yes, that's right. But now, with social media, it just seems more immediate. The force is greater. It's coming from around the world. It's connected.
That's right. And the images are graphic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And just imagine that, the front page of the New York Times, 62 children, and each of them, when you look at it, it's a tragedy. I mean, it really looks, because I don't know about the actual printed version, but on the internet, I saw the internet version of the NYT, and each picture is so sad. There's brothers and sisters together. There's twins. There's people who went to school together.
Regular people. You can't deny they're human beings with lives and futures and dreams.
Exactly, and that takes away from that whole idea that this is a war. The whole idea that this is a war, it's a conflict, it's over disputed territory, because this is the collateral damage, which they try to wrap to dehumanize it. But this is the first time I've actually seen something that I feel quite optimistic about. It's the first time from the States anyway, and I think it's going to drive public opinion. So the 2 or 3 things there. One is that. One is also, you were saying this about the citizen journalism. Now, what role do you think that plays and could potentially play in a situation like this?
Well, that's huge in that it undermines the mainstream media, who always had control over the message, and they could filter out that which they found inconvenient for elite power to be perpetuated. But yeah, the citizen journalism, one, it's immediate, it's real, it's lacking the ideology that people are suspicious of now. They don't trust mainstream media, and for good reason.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, that the construction of what happened in Gaza has really been put together by people. It's not the mainstream narrative, and this is having a lot of people running for cover right now because they want to control the story.
Plus, I mean, they're losing business. They want to make money too, and if people aren't tuning in because they're not covering the story that they know is there, based on the pictures that they see from just regular people, people know that the mainstream media are not covering the story adequately now.
Yeah. And it's just that the way it's wrapped up, like I was watching something just recently on Al Jazeera, and it's about how the conflict is reported and the kind of words and the way the descriptions that are used. And it's very subtle, but something in citizen journalism gets to the hardcore root. It's amateur. It's, right there at the moment. Often there's nothing needs to be said. You just need to see the image.
That's the first principle of journalism. Just be there and report what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
You can, just put a message on it later or interpret it later, but here's a building. It's been destroyed. There's a family. Yeah.
And the other thing is the kind of number of celebrities now as well. Footballers, sports stars, people who are in the public eye in terms of media, entertainment, who are now, kind of putting their names behind the cause. And this also shows a kind of shift, because traditionally there have been people who've supported the Palestinian cause, but it's come with greater and greater cost, because the Israeli lobby is very well organized, it's very well funded, and it's very astute in terms of preventing people really talking about Palestine and the issues there. So, I mean, and it's immense, it's immense that, celebrities are putting their weight behind it. And I really do think that's a very honorable thing, a very noble thing to do, but given that a lot of them know the heat that they're going to take.
They're risking their careers.
Yeah, risking their careers, literally. And so that's one thing that I've been kind of following this week. And also, in terms of ourselves, we spoke last week about Gaza. And we're coming at it from a particular situation. We're just not kind of really innocent bystanders in a way. We were there, and I kind of alluded to that previously. And we were there, and we saw, I guess a lot of our passion about that issue comes from having been there.
Yeah, I lived there for 2.5 years. You lived there for 3 years. Yeah. We both worked at the same university at the same time.
That's right. And that's where we actually met. Me and Doug met at the university. So that's where our friendship really gets cemented from our experience in Palestine. So it resonates with us at many different levels. It was a place that we lived, a place we worked, a place where we had relationships and friendships. And it was also a very kind of, I think for both of us, I would say, it was a point in our lives we made certain decisions, to be there. I mean, it doesn't come lightly. In 2002, 2003, 2004, the occupation was probably at its height in terms of the Intifada and what had been going on. So if you say we lived and worked in Palestine, And I don't want to kind of do this virtue signaling thing, like, yeah, it's a really good thing. I mean, we went there to work, but we also had an interest in Palestine.
And we also spent time together in Israel.
That's right.
So we've seen both sides of the wall and have spent time on both sides. And
that's right. Yeah. And I mean, I think I went there with the view to really understanding it more. I mean, I had a number of options at that time, where I've got a master's degree in linguistics. So, I mean, I had a lot of options where I could go work. I could have come into the Gulf or other places, Turkey, Far East. And just by chance, this job came up in Jenin. And just to set a little bit of context around that, I started work in Jenin, Palestine at the Arab American University in 2003. And in 2002, there'd been the massacre at Jenin camp, which was very similar to what's happening in Gaza now. This seems to be a kind of repetitive thing. Every so often this happens. But I remember that in Jenin, the Israeli army had basically surrounded the camp for 7 days. And then they'd sent the Cobra helicopters in and a team of 20 D9 bulldozers, along with the infantry.
Who makes those bulldozers?
It's Caterpillar.
Caterpillar, that's it.
Caterpillar, yeah. And so this, I mean, when you say bulldozer, don't be deluded,
This is heavy industry.
Yes, yeah. They sent 20 of these, and they are literally, I've seen them on the West Bank, they're like 2 to 3 stories high and armored. And they sent them into the camp. And this is a refugee camp, very densely populated, a lot of children. And for 6-7 days consecutive, they bombed this place into nothingness. I mean, it was just literally, when I went there in 2000, it was just a heap of rubble. And they had literally sent the bulldozers in, sent the helicopters in, and just bombed it and then put their infantry in there. And I had seen the story in 2002. I mean, I followed Palestine for many, many years. And in 2002, it just came to a head in my mind. I was like, what's going on? And where do I stand? I was part of the kind of Palestine Solidarity campaign, the anti-war movement. And I'd been involved in kind of low-level community activism. And then I just thought, something in my mind was like, I just need to go. Somehow I need to get there. And I'd been reading everything. It was just so fresh in my mind, the images, and just seeing the horror of the people.
Well, you were on this issue from childhood.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, that's unusual.
My father was, very interested in the Palestinian issue. So as a child, he used to read articles. I mean, he always used to get papers like the Times and the Guardian, the big broadsheets, And he'd love reading them every morning. And then if he found a good article, then he would say, Tarek, come here. And he'd say, read that article out loud. So I'd read it. And I didn't have a clue what it was about. It was about some issue, Palestinian, about peace, negotiations or something. So I'd read it. And he'd say, isn't that a really good article? And I'd say, yeah, it's a very good, but I didn't understand a word. But, I was aware.
You understood maybe more than you thought.
Yeah,
It just kind of penetrated.
Yeah. It just kind of like, I look back and I think I really did know more than I thought I knew. And then in 82, when Sabra and Shatila happened, that was very important for me. I mean, I remember just the symbolic nature of that. The Palestinians were kind of locked into Beirut. The Israelis had surrounded it. And I just saw them as, what a terrifying situation. They've already been expelled from their homes. They're in a third country. And now the Israelis invade Lebanon to get them. And then the massacre that happened there, 3,200 people were murdered in Sabra and Shatila. And that left a kind of permanent thing in my mind of the kind of horror of this situation. And then Jenin camp, and then I was looking at Jenin camp and said, where does this end? How does it end? When you literally take bulldozers and you bulldoze into people's house, these are refugees. These are people who are, a lot of them housed in the UN refugees program. And so I was looking at it, I was like, what the hell is going on here? I mean, it really did have that impact on me, And then luckily in the February and March of 2003, I see this job, Jenin. And I'm like, I've got to go. I'm not even going to tell anyone, like I've just got to go. And so I made an application there, did the interview, didn't tell anyone. And I spoke to the director. She said, right, just get over, So I made plans to go. And then I thought I'd tell some people, And as soon as I told people, they said, you're mad. What's wrong with you? Are you crazy? You've got 2 children. Mm-hmm. And you really want to put your children in danger. You want to put yourself in danger. You're irresponsible. You're reckless. You're not thinking right. There's something wrong with you. No, really, everyone said that, And it was a overbearing pressure on me because I didn't know, am I making the right decision? Is this really a good decision to make? Because fresh on everyone's mind was the Jenin. Mm-hmm. And
you were going to Jenin.
Yeah, and I was going to Jenin, which is called, by the way, the Martyrs City, because a lot of the resistance emanates from Jenin City. I mean, it's known. And that's one of the reasons why the Israelis went into the camp, was for that reason, because it was one of the strongholds of the Shuhada al-Aqsa, the Islamic Jihad and Hamas. So, that thing, I mean, it was a good thing. I always look back and I think I didn't keel to the pressure. Mm-hmm. I didn't keel. I just said, no, I'm going and I don't care. And it's one of those times that my intransigence was good.
Yeah, you followed your heart.
Yeah, I followed it.
Your instincts, and they were right.
And I think that's, there's often decisions like that, like they're hard to take. I mean, because sometimes, you're looking at it and you're looking one way and you can't really see another way because people are blocking that view for you, So I was like, it's really good. And so I went. And but what about you? Think about how did you get there?
Well, my situation was very different than yours. We in my family we never talked about politics.
But they were kind of right,
kind of
center.
More I think Republican leaning. I mean, I don't know. There wasn't much rhyme or reason. It was just kind of who struck your fancy at the time. We weren't following politics and really following the policies and. Images from Israel and Palestine were coming over the TV daily, but it was meant to confuse, and it was effective in doing that.
So by your kind of when you're formulating ideas about that as a youngster, Farsi, would you have had ideas about it? Were you aware?
Well, I would have said early on that these disagreements are historic, back to biblical times, that. They just can't get along. It's just one of those things. And if only both sides could just stop.
You were just following the kind of...
The narrative.
Yeah, the normal kind of what your average American would have thought then.
And there were a lot of, messages that we should avoid anti-Semitism. And I agree with that wholeheartedly and should avoid being racist. But, again, I was on both sides. So, I was confused. But
hold on. Was it something that was, because I sensed that like Vietnam was important for people in America because they were directly participating. And this is a kind of proxy war, really, for the Americans. And they're supplying the weapons, the political support. Yeah. But is it that important an issue in America in terms of the average person? Do they see it? Do they connect that issue with the extent of the support the Americans give to Israel? Do they see that connection?
They in my view, they didn't then. They probably do now. There's been an advancement in awareness, but back then it was just the mainstream media reporting world events, and they didn't really want the people to come out against Israel, because the U.S. was supporting Israel.
Yeah, but were you aware, for example, that the funding when you were younger, were you aware of the funding of his
I only learned about that later. But I was maybe 10 or 11 years old when the Vietnam War ended, I think. It was around that time. And there was a lot of backlash against the imperialism at that point, and so I kind of registered that. One of my idols was Muhammad Ali. He was speaking out against the Vietnam War, and so, and I understood that there were racial elements to this and colonial ambitions that weren't really favorable to the Vietnamese. I didn't understand the full impact of that, though, either. That it was, I didn't know about the napalm and the ugliness of it. But
just as you said, Ali, there, just on a side note, I mean, we'll get back to that in a second, but just imagine the amount of people he inspired to struggle.
I love that. I love that, man. I love that. I'm obviously white. That he was standing up for oppressed people of color, and he didn't care. He was going to talk. When you told him not to talk, he was going to talk more. I just thought, what a spirit this.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the same with, I was a young guy in Coventry at that time, and that was the only time we were allowed to stay up, was when Ali fought. So Fraser, Foreman, we were allowed to stay up. And he was just so inspirational. And I think somewhere in probably my life as well, he plays a part in that voice, that resistance, that, the idea that, I'm not going to be silent when I see injustice, and he was just that kind of person. So getting back to that then, so how does that then evolve? Because it's strange. You grew up in a kind of context in which you didn't have a family that was political, and you didn't have influences, and there was no internet. Right.
And we lived in the country. It's not like I could make it to the library very often, and I wouldn't have known what to look for. And so, I mean, I was marginalized. I think I identified with the oppressed people because I felt oppressed in some ways.
But I mean, in a sense, you were privileged.
I absolutely was privileged right? in the conventional sense. Yeah. But I felt within that realm of privilege, I was on the edge. I did.
I can understand that. I can understand that. So, I mean, you felt alone, isolated from the mainstream, basically.
I did.
And money wasn't going to fill that gap either.
I didn't see much of a future for myself, and I never thought I would have money. I never thought I would enjoy the kind of life I have now. But so it was really, went through a dark period. But it was, I stayed open to ideas. I was exposed to some, there was, in the 80s, there was protests against the Nicaragua war, the Contras and the Sandinistas, and I kind of paid attention to that. There was stuff going on at my university, and I began to realize that the U.S. was on the wrong side of that war, and Reagan was talking about the freedom fighters, and that language actually struck me, because I thought that guy is lying. What freedom for what? It just didn't add up.
But I think that's quite critical, to be honest with you. I mean, I think it's quite critical that, when you talk about that experience and you say you felt marginalized and some things weren't kind of fitting in to your worldview.
Right.
And although you didn't know what that worldview was, do you understand what I mean? It's coming from something within.
There was a harshness that emerged in the 80s, an economic harshness that was palpable. And there was this new emerging sense of hyper selfishness and independence and
individualism.
And this widening gap in wealth and this focus on image. Image is everything. Who said that? One of the famous athletes, I think.
Right.
Well, anyway. Yeah. So I mean, and I was not an image guy. I mean, I really felt that this is never going to work for me.
Yeah, because you're not into that.
I was a kind of a dork, to be honest with you. Skinny, underweight, and bad haircut, and terrible clothes. And, I didn't fit into this image-conscious society. And so...
they're pounding you with that, image, money, wealth, and individualism.
This was really the heart of America at that time. It still is.
It still is to a large extent. Yeah.
And so... when they're talking about freedom fighters, who was fighting for freedom at home?
And with who and for what? Yeah.
So, I followed that a little bit, and I just thought, okay, keep your eyes and ears open. And I kind of went into my 30s with that attitude. And I stumbled across the writings of Noam Chomsky. And that was in the mid-90s, late 90s maybe. And I read Powers and Prospects. And it just blew me away, blew my head open.
Yeah, Chomsky is just an intellectual giant.
Yes.
A giant.
And I've since read, 20 or 30 of his books. Anything I could get my hands on, I was reading voraciously. And it led me to read Howard Zinn and Edward Said and
Powerful stuff.
yeah, and on and on. I mean, I read about corporations, how corporations rule the world, and the best democracy money can buy, and these.
So you basically were then into that. You went into that trajectory of thought where you wanted to know more.
I got hungry because suddenly I understood my plight and that I wasn't alone. And so
1 second before you go on from that, when you say I wasn't alone, that is a powerful thing.
Yeah.
Because I think societies tend to alienate you, say that these feelings are only you're having.
Shame on you for not being wealthy.
Yeah.
Shame on you for worrying about money and not having to have nice clothes and a good haircut. Even.
Yeah. And the idea that it's only you.
Yeah.
You're kind of alone. And I think reading into that trajectory of, Chomsky and, Edward Said and stuff, you begin to say, well, there's other people like this.
And there's a system to this.
Yeah.
And I began to understand the system of power. And I read, as soon as it came out, I think it was Understanding Power. And that was brilliant. I think indispensable Chomsky, and I still have that. It's a Bible. It's just incredible. And it talks about how power is manipulated, how it's how consent is manufactured. And that was another one of his books, Manufacturing Consent, and how power is perpetuated.
That's just giving me an idea. As a side note, we need to do one podcast on the kind of books we've read.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Well, you're an academic. I mean, you're going to bury me under a load of books there. I'll bring my dozen to the table.
We'll talk about it, some of the influential books, because I think that's, this is very, interesting and important, because you're sitting there, you don't have a kind of worldview, you don't have a narrative you can hold on to, and then you start getting ideas.
Yeah.
And you need to then feed yourself some knowledge. You need to know, firstly, I'm not alone. There's other ways to theorize the world, to understand it. It's not
and to resist.
And
to resist.
And to find creative ways of resistance out of it, But you're never going to get there if you don't have the knowledge or the capacity to know. And it's much easier now. I mean, I applaud anyone at that time who could navigate the books and, find the ideas, because it's much easier now, right? I mean, you literally
that was
do a search.
pre-internet,
Yeah. You got to go to bookshops, you got to go to libraries, you got to know names, and then you'll go down this kind of maze of different people. And then, pretty much me and you are in very similar intellectual territory when it comes to that stuff, because we've read around the same types of people.
Well, whenever I mention a book, you've read it.
Yeah. So you've taken that line, so that then gave you so much more to, you understood the world a little bit better.
A little bit better, and I was just, and then looking for my avenue, my place, my way to maneuver, and then I moved to Louisville in the early 2000s, and that's when George Bush Jr. started his rhetoric against
But
Iraq.
he started warmongering.
Against Iraq, of all places. I mean, it was stunning. And that's, Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm talking about, is a Republican stronghold. And people were rah-rah about this. I mean, there's a peace community there that resisted, but for the most part, people were pretty gung-ho about this impending war. And it was really scary. And I just thought, well, I've got to...
And people were behind it. They were right behind it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That was the other scary part of this. People were literally digesting the propaganda. They weren't asking any critical questions. I mean, large swathes of the population.
No, they were just living inside of the ideology of
American exceptionalism.
Yeah, patriotism and yeah, it had a grip on them. And I understand that because, I mean, I grew up in that. And so, yeah, so I got involved. I joined a peace organization there. There was not, joined. I just started going. And we had some really interesting activities. I mean, we put yard signs. At first I thought, this is going to, what's this? But put yard signs around saying, no war in Iraq and
You're raising consciousness and awareness about the issue.
And I knew it was effective when, after a while, it began to be reported in the news. And then the Republicans put about hundreds and thousands of signs that were professional in yards. And they kind of, swarmed us with signs. So anyway, at one point I just said, I'm not going to take this. I'm not going to be here when the U.S. launches missiles against Iraq. I'm going to be in Iraq. And it was a crazy idea. I mean, I was at the end of my rope. I was in my bedroom one night and I said, I am not going to take this. Was it your conscience, basically? Your conscience was saying that to I
you,
was angry, and I just said...
angry and frustrated.
Yeah.
Maybe. I
said, all right, if you're going to bomb... Because I really believe in this idea that when you kill someone, you're killing part of yourself. That you can't... There is no other. We're just all one. I know it sounds hokey and, new agey, but I believe it. And you can't kill another person without killing part of yourself. So I said, all right, you're going to bomb Iraq, bomb me. And I just thought, let's do it, okay?
But that for most people, you see, right there, you're thinking that's, kind of normal.
I don't know about normal.
Yeah, but it's like me saying, I'm going to Jenin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's like similar.
That. It's like that.
Anyone is going to say you're insane, but there is something within you that intuitively is right about the decision you're making.
I was not going to be deterred.
Yeah.
So I got on, then I was on the internet by this point, and I got on and I looked for groups sending delegations to Iraq, and there was one in New York and one in Chicago, and I read about them. The one in New York had never sent anyone. So I said, all right, that would be dangerous. So I looked at the one in Chicago, it was Voices in the Wilderness. I'd never heard of them, run by Kathy Kelly. I'd never heard of her.
Yeah.
And they had an application form where you could go. And I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. I filled it out. And a couple of days later, they called me. And they called me on the phone. I mean, they didn't answer my email. They just called me up and they asked me if I knew Hans von Spanik. And I said, no. And they asked me, do you know someone else? I said, no. And they said, okay, we'll take you. Even though I'm just marginally qualified, I'm not, who am I anyway? And so
but you don't have to be for that, really. I mean, you've just got to have a conscience. You've got to be able to oppose. You've got to have a set of principles that tell you war is wrong.
Yeah, I think they wanted to see if I was crazy or not.
Yeah.
They don't want to take crazy people.
So they tick the box on that one. He ain't crazy.
Yeah, he was able to answer our questions. Okay, so so I went, and again I had this blowback from my family. My brother wrote me and said, "Have you got your ticket yet?" I said, "No." Okay, you can change your mind. And then I was ranting at him and ranting at other people because I was outraged. If you're going to oppose something, don't oppose me going. Oppose this war. And he did oppose it. I'm not trying to say he didn't, but and my cousins quit talking to my family, quit talking to my father. I mean, it was ugly.
And they never spoke to him again.
Right. And I don't care.
But that's quite heavy. I mean, it's, people take this stuff seriously. They can be ideologically entrenched so far that you disturb their reality that, and they really feel it. Because, I mean, in effect, they've been given something and they're cushioned in this bubble, and you're saying, you're in the wrong place here. You're thinking about this in the wrong way.
And I'm just popping the bubble of patriotism. I'm not a patriot. I mean, why not be a matriot? Right? What is this idea of patriotism?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more aligned with Mother Earth. Let's take care of everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I mean, but that's, for some people, that would just be a difficult concept to get to, you know. It would be a difficult concept because you're kind of ideologically trained, you're conditioned to believe that idea, you know. So, I mean, you're out of that, people are just going to say, he's mad, just leave him alone or something, you know.
But the facts were clear to me. I knew with a certainty that Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And Scott Ritter was putting out articles almost daily, and he was on the inspection team for weapons in Iraq, and he was saying any weapons they had already been destroyed. He could verify that. This guy's an ex-Marine. He's not against U.S. war per se, but he was against that U.S. war because it was unnecessary, it was unjust, it was built on lies, and this was clear. I mean, all he had to do was just look, you know, and, you know, so anyway, I went, and I was there for 6 weeks and experienced that. I know what it's like to be.
And that's why you would have linked up with other people, right?
Yeah, well, I was there with Catholic workers and who else? The Veterans Against, I forget now, but the Catholic workers were a big component of that. Yeah. And good people, really, really interesting people too. And so, yeah, I spent 6 weeks there, and, you know, I understand what war is now. And
it's a horrific.
It's horrific. And if you're, you know, in the military, you know, wanting to go to war, you should think about what you're looking at. Because, I mean, even my own father, was pro-war, he supported that war, he's never seen war. You need to be in that. You need to experience it.
There's a horror and a inhumanity in war that I think no amount of watching documentaries or, you know, YouTube videos is ever going to show you.
Nothing can simulate the explosion of a cruise missile. There's the impact of it is felt for miles. It may explode a building, but it changes the pressure in the room, and you will feel it go through your body and move your organs. And it's really scary.
Yeah.
And the entire time I was there, the pictures on the walls were rattling, and the building was shaking, and that became normal. And
how many cruise missiles did they rain down on Baghdad?
I heard 1,000. Each one costs $1 million. If you do the math, that's $1 billion.
And, you know, just imagine the amount of explosive force that has, and what kind of condition that would have left people, and the kind of terror, the fright, the horror of it, and in every sense, you really don't know. There's the uncertainty of it, of where it's going to land, who it's going to hurt, and even if it doesn't land near you, it's where it has landed and what damage it has done.
One day we were in the hotel lobby, and it has glass windows, and they had taped them up to keep them from shattering, but you know, the glass is exposed. And the bombing was heavy that day, and there was a reporter, a photographer actually. He was independent, but he was there to cover the story, and he was hiding behind a marble desk that the hotel used. And I was so normalized, you know, for me it was like another day. And I looked behind there and I saw him huddling down, and I just thought, this poor guy, you know. And then I looked back, and it was me.
Yeah.
I mean, what was wrong with me? And now I look at the Palestinians, and I have the same understanding of what they're going through. You may look at children, they may be playing, and they may not seem like they're suffering, but they are suffering, because you cannot experience bombing and not be affected. I mean, when I went back to the States, I thought everything was fine. And then when I got back, I realized I wasn't okay. I was really angry. I was cursing cars that would drive by with one person in them. I mean, I was a raving lunatic. not screaming at them, but I mean, I was really angry. And I was dreaming of planes flying overhead, and I thought that was real. You know, I was messed up.
It does
for a while.
mess you. I mean, and I can understand that because I mean, there is just, I mean, even our time in the West Bank, just that, you know, the sense that it gives you. I mean, that last week when we played that video, and you know, I thought that really epitomized it, the kind of inhumanity of that situation, because there's a sense in which you're completely disempowered as well. I mean, you can't control your surroundings. You can't control what happens.
Right.
And you don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, there's such a level of uncertainty. There's such a level of violence, of, you know, just a suppression, basically, you know.
Well, and they live with the idea that a bomb might drop on me any minute.
That's right.
Now, think you're in the U.S. You know that's not going to happen. No, there's more and more violence in the U.S. There's mass shootings daily, but still the chances are remote. But if you're in Gaza, and as you've said, it's, how long is it? What's the dimensions?
27 miles by 7, something like
I mean,
that. And 2 million people in one space.
Yeah, bombs are dropping all over the place. Yeah, and you might be next. And if you're okay with that, if you're like, then something's wrong.
No.
You're supposed to be afraid.
And I watched a follow-on video for that one we did in the last podcast. And that little girl, she did a little follow-on video with, I think it was with Middle Eastern News or something. And she was saying, you know, I do get scared, but I don't want to tell my little brother. I don't want him to feel scared, you know. Because that's also, you know, like all the kids are traumatized basically by war, by suffering, by the plight that they go through and that daily grind. And you said it very well last week that, you know, it's not just the war, it's not just the bombs, you know, it's not just the guns, it's not just the firing, it's just daily life.
Oh.
You know, like you know, I mean, I think we kind of lose connection with that idea that what is it like to live in a state of war, you know? Like, I mean, the water's out, the electricity's out, the internet's out, you know, fuel is difficult to get, you're scared to go outside, you're scared not for just yourself, you're scared for your family, you know, products are in short supply, medicines are in short supply. I mean, it's just a whole context of inhumanity. And it's daily. It's just never ending. You know, like the occupation in the West Bank. And we've never been to Gaza, but you could speak to the West Bank. I mean, you know, we're now, for a year and a couple of months, we've been in this lockdown. For all the time we were in Jenin, they were in lockdown. I mean, it's unbelievable.
That's right. That's a good way to,
you know, like, don't people see, you know, you heard the amount of conversation around mental health.
Yeah, there you go.
Because they can't go out.
Yeah.
And, you know, the extended curfews in Jenin, I mean, literally, you know, 6 months at a time, a year at a time, the city was closed off. At night, it was curfewed. People couldn't go out. It was a shoot to kill policy. Mm-hmm. And that's daily. Yeah. And, you know, and it occurred to me the other day that the other sides of that are the kind of economic terrorism when, you know, people are unable to work, you know, in the Gaza and in the West Bank. It's often the case that the freedom of movement is restricted. Financial transactions even are restricted. You know, for example, we were in the West Bank. How many months did we not get a salary? And everyone, not just us. But I think it was around 6 months, you know, because all transactions were closed off by Israel.
We were privileged.
Yeah.
You know,
but we still didn't get the salary. I mean, everyone didn't get the salary. And, you know, like they tried their very hardest to do it because we were, you know, foreigners there and they felt obliged. But when we went along with everyone else and I was director at the time, so no one else gets it. We don't get it. I mean, it's very simple. We have to stand in solidarity. But can you imagine that? You know, families to feed, you know, for months on end. Yeah. You've got no source of income. And then on top of that, you've got restrictions on movement. You've got curfews. You've got closures. And it's just relentless. And I think going back to what we said at the start, that I think that part of it now, that part of that story, that feeling of connecting to that story, just like you felt when you had that moment of objection of consciousness, when you were there at night and you said, I don't agree to this. And it's like me seeing Janine in 2002. And I think that there's moments, I'm seeing various videos about Gaza being shared virally. And they all seem to touch the right places. I've seen very little about about the history and United. I haven't seen Resolution 193 and 242 for the whole duration of this, 2 weeks. Because I think that's all designed to confuse you.
We're beyond that.
Yeah,
I mean,
all of that. So, but the US and stuff wants to keep it in that discussion.
Of course, it's worked for so many years.
Yeah, they want so hard to keep it in that discussion. But like we said last week, there's a simplicity to this. And there's also, there are means of resistance. And I think the way things are going, I feel very optimistic. I feel very hopeful that, the constellation of ideas is going to change, is going to change.
Yeah. I've also been hopeful since, we talked about that, and I thought, there's a sea change of understanding of consciousness going on here.
Yes, there is a shift in consciousness, and that shift, I'll be frank, there would be no ceasefire right now in Gaza. There would be no ceasefire. The Israelis are brutal, ruthless, and there's no limit to the brutality.
They would like to nuke Gaza.
Yes,
they would flatten Gaza.
If they had their way, they would go in there with aircraft cover, tanks, and just mow it down. Flat, with everyone in it.
Everyone dead.
Yeah, everyone dead. They would have no problem with that. Now, what's happened now is that the intensity, there is no, we've got some kind of humanitarian concerns, or we're conceding to something. Just the scale and the breadth and the weight of the pressure has been so intense that their propaganda machine just isn't functioning. They look stupid